What do I think about Resident Evil Village? Stay tuned to find out. Resident Evil Village has launched. The big new chapter of Resident Evil from Capcom is finally here, and it's a hard game to nail down. At times, I find it incredibly good, and at other times, I find it a bit predictable and samey, and a lot of the ideas from previous Resident Evil games being represented again feel at times a bit stale to me. So the first thing that you'll notice are the graphics. And while this is a game deeply rooted in last generation, as it runs on everything from a 1.8 teraflop PS4, from an Xbox One X to an Xbox Series X, the game does incorporate a lot of next generation features that we're seeing early on, like ray tracing, frame rate, load times with the SSD. So all of that is incredibly good. And the first person perspective does lend to a bit of the building of tension and placing you in the world and having you feel like you're actually interacting with the characters and the story in this world. But it's here, it's in this perspective that I think it misses a lot, and I'll talk about it. Clearly, Capcom wants you to care about Ethan Winters, the main protagonist of Resident Evil Village. But the story, it just isn't that interesting, and the first-person perspective really takes you out of the idea of being connected to a character and caring about the character. On the one hand, they want you to care deeply about Ethan, but on the other hand, you never actually see Ethan. You never actually see him interact in this world. When you're in the first-person perspective, you sort of lose that connection to a character because you're just playing the game. It doesn't matter who the character is, which is where I feel that this first-person's perspective for Resident Evil is starting to lose its shine, starting to lose the ability to connect the player to a character in the world of Resident Evil. So there's standard Resident Evil fare. You can't get through a door until you find a certain key. You can't open up a lock until you find a certain emblem. There's backtracking to go into different areas, everything that you're used to in previous Resident Evil games. But I don't feel like any of it is done as well as the previous Resident Evil. I thought that game, not only setting a new perspective for Resident Evil with first person, but the environment, the story, and the family, everything was just more terrifying, more scary, and much more creepy than this game. And that's one of my biggest problems with this game, is that it's just not scary at all. Lady Dimitrescu, or however you say her name, you think she's going to be this big character in the world of Resident Evil Village, and really, she's not. The first part of the game, getting to the mansion, once you get inside the mansion, again, it becomes a sort of standard Resident Evil game, and she isn't really that terrifying at all. And to me, the game picks up and becomes much better once you defeat her and her sisters. That's when I feel the game becomes really good and not just one of a number of survival horror games that you've played before. And speaking of a number of games that you've played before, here's another criticism that I've had. There are many more games now that build tension, that are survival horror, that are psychologically terrifying, like Outlast 2, Layers of Fear 2. There is more competition now in the space, and I feel like Resident Evil hasn't evolved because those games, in particular Outlast 2, is much more terrifying and disturbing than Resident Evil Village. And I feel like as a Resident Evil game, they're leaning too much on the past. And I know that the series is built around this sort of goofy idea and goofy characters, and that's the charm of the series. But I feel like as the premier survival horror game, it's really taken a step back to these other games. And I'm hoping in the future that they decide to really deep dive into that horror. There are a few instances like that really creepy baby. If you've played the game, you know what I'm talking about. And they don't really do anything with it, or the husk that's covered in boils, the boss that you fight, and they really don't do anything with that either. And it just becomes formulaic to me. And I was disappointed in that aspect. Now, it is not a bad game. I know this sounds like it's a bad game. It's very, very good. Technically, it's very good. The gunplay is just okay. That's an area, again, where I feel like that first-person perspective, it just doesn't work for me. And hopefully we get some sort of spin-off or something where you can go back to a third-person perspective, because I really think that that works better for Resident Evil. But again, technically, this is a very good game. It's very entertaining, and it is very fun. There are just a few things that I found deeply troubling about the series, and I was hoping that they would evolve those things from 7. And it feels very formulaic, as I've said. There are a number of different characters and bosses in this game, and I'm not going to ruin the story at all, but I will say that I feel like they were trying to set a different tone when you face each of these different bosses. And some of them work, and some of them just don't. The one that really works, and I won't ruin the story again, is this creepy doll boss. And that's when the game shifts from just this formulaic survival horror game to a psychological story, a psychological game that builds tension. Psychological horror, to me, is much more enjoyable than those jump scares. And that particular boss and the events that take place leading through this boss's level to the final fight are, to me, the high points of this game. And I wish that they would pivot a bit to that style of horror rather than this sort of formulaic approach to Resident Evil. But I do know that a lot of people did enjoy this game, and I don't want to make it sound like I didn't. I just found a lot of it to be just okay, and I was expecting to be scared a lot more. The whole werewolf vampire thing to me is overused. And again, I feel like that first-person perspective in the last Resident Evil game was just this new thing. It was this big new idea. But I do feel like maybe it doesn't work very well for Resident Evil. So what would I give the game? I'd say it's a solid 7.5 out of 10. Now, if you like the last Resident Evil, you are going to enjoy this game immensely. But if you're looking for an evolution from that next game with some new gameplay ideas, the only really new thing in this game is the crafting system. You can craft everything from, ammunition all the way up to explosives, and that's really cool. You can also sell some collectibles that you find in the world to get money to upgrade your weapons. So there is sort of an RPG element to the game at all. But beyond that, there really isn't anything that stands out as an evolution for the Resident Evil series when you compare it to other survival horror games. And there are much more terrifying games out there to play than Resident Evil. But let me know what you think about this game. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Were you just okay with it? Let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. Think about hitting the like button and subscribing and sharing this video out on your favorite social media platform of choice. And I'll see you in the next one.